Hello, hello. Here we are again, coming to you from Broadcast Team Alpha on 44 different platforms around the world. And we are going to talk about something that is going to be very interesting because I have an excellent guest with me, Adam Stokes. He is returning to Broadcast Team Alpha. And of course, this is the Paranormal World Show. So it's under the umbrella of the Mastermind and the Broadcast Team Alpha show. And we are also transmitting on the 44 different platforms. Actually, it is kind of more than that, but we are saying 44 to make sure because I don't even know where we are anymore. We are also on the Conscious Awakening Network, 3 TV stations, and a bunch of social media sites. And we have Adam Stokes. Let me give you a quick introduction for him because very well educated man, and he kind of goes against the establishment agenda once in a while in pointing out maybe where they are not quite totally correct. He is a professor. He holds a degree from Duke University and Yale the Divinity School in Religious and Biblical Studies. He understands several languages, including Hebrew, Ancient Greek, Latin, and German. And he writes lectures on ancient cultures and civilizations with a special interest in ancient American civilizations and the giants of Americas. And that is what we're going to talk about because there is ample evidence. Yes, there were giants. Some of them were really tall. I have seen a femur bone of somebody who ever owned that bone, had it in their body, was somewhere around 32 foot tall. So that bone is out there. So anyway, welcome to the show, Adam.
It's great to be back, Aki. So good to see you again.
Yeah, this is going to be fun.
Yes, I've
Now,
been keeping up with all the great work you've been doing. So I know it's been a while, but it is really good to be back.
yeah, that this is going to be good because since last time you've written some books and you've done a lot of things, and you're a very busy man. But when we talk about giants in America, where do you want to start out explaining that this is real?
Well, I think the best place to start out at is basically are the traditions of the Native American peoples, the people indigenous to this land. And if you look at the oral traditions of various Native American tribes, they all talk about these people known generically as the Mound Builders, who left us with these great sites, these earthworks and mounds all across the United States, though they're primarily located in the Midwest, but they're found all across the United States. They even go all the way to the East Coast. There are mounds in Delaware and Connecticut. I've taken my kids to both of the mounds in both of those states. So they're all over the place, and all of these Native American traditions describe the mound builders as being of taller than normal stature. Not just taller than normal stature, I'll correct myself there, but as being significantly bigger than the indigenous inhabitants. And they seem to have intermixed with Native Americans. So when you read materials such as the journals of John Smith, who was one of the first European explorers here, he's really famous from the traditions about Pocahontas, the Disney movie Pocahontas. He was a main character in that, voiced by Mel Gibson. But anyway, he has these woodcuts and these sketches in his journal, and it shows him engaging with Native American chiefs who are at least twice his size. These guys are enormous, and they make the claim that they are descended, that their lineage comes from these mound builders. But the mound builder civilization itself seems to have ceased many hundreds of years, even probably like 1,000 years before European entry into North America. So there are a lot of native traditions about these mound builders, that they were of extraordinary height, and the archaeological evidence we have for them suggests that they're not native to America, but that they came from someplace else, namely, most likely the Middle East.
Hmm. Now, hardly anybody talks about this. And if you go to the
No,
Smithsonian and ask them about them, they're all you're going to get back is a
yeah.
blank stare.
Which is weird, which is a shame because this was very well known information to the founders of this country. I always point out Thomas Jefferson was our first Indiana Jones in America. He was our first archaeologist, and he wrote extensively. So we think about Thomas Jefferson, we think about the Declaration of Independence, we think about the Jefferson Bible, which is one of my favorite texts by him. But some of his earliest writings were these excavations of these mounds, and unfortunately, he kind of destroyed some stuff while trying to excavate them. That was kind of bound to happen, sadly. But he talks about finding, and you had mentioned this while we were talking before the program. He talks about finding very large femurs, very large skeletal bones, suggesting that these people were of above normal height. And much later, Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, when he makes a speech, he talks about the giant mound builders as well.
Yeah.
But when the Smithsonian comes along, and I'm glad you mentioned them, they kind of push back. They start basically a campaign of propaganda, which the elites always do, against something that everybody knew, everybody basically understood to be true. They push back against that for kind of prejudicial, bigoted reasons in regards to their view of Native Americans. They didn't want anyone to think that there was any type of advanced civilization here in America before modern Europeans. They push back on that, and the propaganda that they use works really, really well. And even though I think that the Smithsonian has done a lot to reckon with its past, I take my kids to Smithsonian every couple of years. We're not that far away here in Jersey. We're about 2 hours away from DC. And so they've done a much better job, I think, in past decades of looking at ancient North America, but there's still even now in the 21st century, there's still kind of a pushback against a little bit of a pushback against this understanding of the mound builders as this great and ancient civilization. People don't talk about it a lot, and when they do, it's always kind of in a very ambiguous way. Oh, these were just mound builders. They made these ceremonial sites, but there's not that much more that we can say about them. But that's just not true, Augie. There's a lot that we can say about them. There's a lot that we know about them from their archaeological remains.
Now, you got some serious religious studies behind you also.
Yes, yes.
What do you think is the reason for this cover up? Is it religious or is it political? Or what do you think?
That's a great question. I think both are going on. So I think in I think when this started to happen, when the cover up started to happen in the late 1800s, I think it was both political and religious. What do I mean by that? Well, political in the sense of if you're going to accept the idea that Native Americans and basically their ancestors, these mound building people who intermarried, who intermixed with Native Americans, had an ancient and great civilization, then you have to consider the Native Americans to be human. And in the late 1800s, that was not a popular idea. I was watching a show the other day called Bass Reeves. It's about one of the first Black American sheriffs, law enforcement men in the 1800s. And he's working with these other sheriffs, and they're basically talking about the Indians. Sometimes they talk about him like this, but they're mainly talking about the Indians like they're just savages. The guy says basically the Indians aren't human. And so that is the sentiment that was undergirding kind of Smithsonian's view of ancient America back in the 1800s. But there is also a religious element. So I'm from a Latter-day Saint tradition. I consider myself a Mormon. I'm not from the Utah Salt Lake City Church, but I am part of a smaller tradition. And in the early 1800s, when Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, comes out with the Book of Mormon, it's claiming that there was indeed an ancient civilization in North America that was highly advanced, that was highly technologically advanced. And in the same hometown that Joseph Smith grew up in, Palmyra, New York, That's the same hometown that John Wesley Powell came from. If you've heard that, you've probably heard that name before because he became the head of Smithsonian. He was probably the leading archaeologist in the mid to late 1800s, and he becomes the head of the Smithsonian. And so he has kind of a beef with Mormonism to begin with, and so it's very much beneficial to him to claim that there was no really advanced ancient American civilization, that ancient American civilization was primitive, that it was savage, because to say the opposite would be to support the claims of Mormons that he hates. So there's both political and religious reasons
Yeah.
for this cover up.
Yeah, that's when it comes to the giants, they it wasn't just the height. They had a double row of teeth, and they were a
Yes.
little different in some ways. So
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
is a seriously genetic difference.
Yes. Massive genetic differences. So the teeth were different. Also, the skull was different. A lot of these giants, these mound builders, have elongated skulls. And we see that both in North America and in South America. And I think the South American giants are basically the North American giants migrating south. So I think they're all kind of part of the same race. But they had these elongated skulls, and it's always been my contention, Agi, that these elongated skulls, if you look at the history of, say, the Druids, for example, in Europe, and other great ancient European civilizations, whenever a dude has a really big skull, he uses that kind of for like his psychic ability to build and to create things. So I think Stonehenge was created with this psychic ability, and I think the mounds that are here in North America were created with their psychic ability. Now, people will push back and say, Adam, they're just clumps of dirt. But if we have to recall that back in the day, they looked much different than they do now. There's been a lot of erosion. People have gone into them. People have disrupted them. People have destroyed them. It's kind of like the Egyptian pyramids. So you look at the Egyptian pyramids today, they're still amazing, but they were absolutely glorious back in their heyday. They were covered with gold. And a lot of these mounds were covered with things as well, with gold plating and stuff like that. So they were very similar in many respects to the Egyptian pyramids, and they had a glorious kind of a magnificence about them that's kind of been lost over the centuries. So they looked quite different, and they're actually very, very. People just say, "Oh, it's a clump of dirt," but it's actually very, very hard to build these things. There's a mainstream archaeologist, Bradley Lepper, who talks about basically the impossibility of building these mounds, even with slave labor. There just weren't enough. There wouldn't have been enough people. So that raises the question: how are these mounds built? And again, I go back to my own personal opinion is that this was his psychic ability, and that is what was facilitated by by the cranium of these giants, this large skull.
I have studied the German giants quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I found some things in old Roman writings, some of the surviving Roman records, where they say the Romans, they used the German giants in front of the rest of the army sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they actually had an armor
Yeah.
that they have a sample of that armor that the giants wore.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
could fit two people in it, and it weighed 800 pounds.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this is really well documented. So, as you mentioned, I'm fluent in multiple languages. I actually serve as a Latin teacher. That's my main occupation. And this past semester, we read Caesar's Gallic Wars, and this is very well documented. So, a lot of the Germans, like the Germans, didn't want the Romans in there, but some Germans were actually conscripted into the Roman army. And like you
Yep.
said, Caesar describes their armor very intimately in very exact detail. And like you said, this is an armor that I could put on, not as a 5'3" person. So, or most modern day people could put on.
Isn't it amazing how we've been had?
Yes, yes. And a lot of people don't know it's funny, Aki, because sometimes when you read the ancient literature as you have, it's right before our eyes. But then you're like, wow, I'm so amazed. I never knew this because nobody ever talks about it. So it's there, but then at the same sense, we've kind of suppressed it so that's not there at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's take that. We know we have the skeletons, we have the stories, we have the drawings of people that have met them, made the drawings back in the early 1800s and so on.
Mm-hmm.
They are here in the Americas. And you think that they came from the Middle East. Let's say they
Yes.
did. and I because they're there too.
Yeah.
Now, where did they come from when they ended up in the Middle East? Where did the ultimate giants come from in the distant past?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I always turn to whenever I'm asked that question, I always turn to Genesis chapter 6, and it talks about the Nephilim, and that gets translated in the Greek and the Latin as gigantes. I think the Nephilim are a race memory of a much earlier, much more ancient civilization. And if I had to put my finger on it and give a name, I would say Atlantis. If you read the Atlantis tradition, so if you read the Greek traditions about Atlantis, Philostratus, Plato, etc., if you read some of the material that Edgar Cayce did on Atlantis, it all talks about Atlantis being this highly advanced civilization where the people, again, use their psychic ability to create things and to make things. And that's exactly what you see with the Mound Builders. So I think the Mound Builders are basically, as Genesis 6 suggests, they are they are descended from these giants intermarrying and interbreeding with what becomes the people of Israel. But those original giants came from the lost city of Atlantis.
Yeah, and then there are hieroglyphs in Egypt. They depict the really tall people next
Mm-hmm.
to
Yes,
regulars.
so the servants, yes, and they show the servants and they show the regular Egyptians, and then you have these giant people. It's interesting, Aki, if you've ever seen the movie Gods of Egypt, people were really upset about that because they had some like Western actors, European actors playing the Egyptian gods, but I think it did an excellent job because it shows the gods are gigantic, and the
Yeah,
normal people, the Egyptian priests and stuff like that, are just our size. And I don't think that's mythology. I think that's a memory
yeah,
of these giants who were descended from Atlantis, and there's a direct connection between Egypt and Atlantis with the pyramids.
yeah. And then, of course, the Anunnaki were also very tall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. So mentioned in the Sumerian text, and
Yeah.
Zechariah Sitchin does a lot with them. There's a great documentary. I thought you were you part of that documentary? There's one on the Anunnaki that was very very profound. I recommend it to anybody.
Yeah, and we are told that Columbus discovered America. Sure, he did. My name is Cleopatra too, just as true.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Now, the thing about it is that there are Egyptian artifacts that is found in North America,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, in Canada also, not just the United States.
Mm-hmm.
In Ohio, you wrote a book on that, From Egypt to Ohio. Talk
Yes,
about
yes.
this.
So yeah, basically, in this book, there's a poster of it back here. From Egypt to Ohio, I basically make the argument that the mound builders were this Egyptian Israelite hybrid, and that's why you have in Ohio, you have these Egyptian inscriptions that have been found. You have these Hebrew inscriptions that have been found. So this is definitely whoever the mound builders were. They were some type of Semitic people, whether Egyptian, Israelite, or etc. Or in my opinion, they were kind of a mixture of both. So you have these Egyptian inscriptions, these Egyptian artifacts, and also these Hebrew artifacts. We found cartouches here in North America. In Ohio, there was a cat cartouche that was found. Egyptian symbolism on many relics that have been found in the Midwest. So they were definitely here. And this is something, if you ever read a book by Brian Jennings called Ancient North America, he is a mainstream archaeologist. He wrote the book back in the 70s, but in the last couple of chapters of his book, he shows and he mentions a lot of these Egyptian artifacts that have been found here in North America. He doesn't put it in the main part of his book because he doesn't really, I don't think he wants you to know about it. But even he has to attest. He's a mainstream archaeologist, and even he has to attest to some of these findings of Egyptian artifacts here in North America.
Hmm.
So we talk about we being separated by these people for centuries that we're all different, but really, Agi, we're all the same. There's a force, there's a cosmos that unifies all of us. So the Egyptians didn't just do their thing over there; they also came over here, and yeah, we're all interconnected, Agi.
Yes, we are. And in fact, up in the Grand Canyon area, there is caves up there where
Yes.
they found Egyptian artifacts, Egyptian
Hmm.
writing. In fact, even further than that, I had a friend, he's gone now, but I had a friend in Tucson that did a lot of digging around up in the 1970s, 80s, up in the
Yeah.
Grand Canyon area. And he found some of those artifacts and he brought home a plate, a gold plate with Egyptian writing on it.
Yeah.
He had
Yeah.
it at his home
Yeah.
and he had it on a table. I saw the thing. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
there. He brought
Yeah.
it from the Grand Canyon.
Yeah,
And
the Grand Canyon has like amazing stuff
yeah,
in it, and it's also, Augie, as you probably know this, one of the hardest places to get permission from the U.S. government to excavate at. So you can't go as deep into it as you would like without the U.S. government's permission. And I think a lot of that has to do with kind of this holdover. Since Smithsonian was part of the government, still is part of the government. Um, I don't think people want you to see what is in the Grand Canyon because I think if they did it would overturn a lot of what mainstream archaeology says is the history of ancient North America.
yeah. And you know how those people that kind of pull the strings within archaeology, they sure don't want to admit that they've ever been wrong.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh man, oh man. And you got another book coming out too, which
Yes, so this
you
came out a
should.
couple years back. This is kind of my follow-up from Egypt to Ohio called Relics of Babel. And it
Uh-huh.
talks about some of these inscriptions from a collection known as the Michigan Relics. Now, the Michigan Relics were thought to be forgeries for many years. That's still kind of the mainstream view of them. But there's a lot of evidence that has come into play that calls that into question for at least a lot of the artifacts. And I have admitted this before, I think some of them might be forgeries, but I do not think the vast majority of them are. And they contain going back to your point earlier, they contain text and letters in Egyptian, Hebrew, and other Semitic languages. So kind of reflecting this blend of Semitic cultures that we have here, not in the Near East, but here in North America.
Mm. Yeah, no. If you look at newspaper history here in the United States, I have read probably at least 10, 15 newspaper articles dating back 100 years or about that, where they said, yeah, we found this skeleton. It was 9'4", and then there was
Mm-hmm.
one that was 10 foot something, and he
Yep.
had double row of teeth, and they
Mm-hmm.
explain it 100 years ago in the newspaper article, and they
Mm-hmm.
also explained that, oh, the Smithsonian came and took it. Here's a
Mm-hmm.
here's a pearl for you folks. A few years ago, the Smithsonian was sued and they had to go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that the Smithsonian had to release the information about the American giants when asked to do so. So, if you find one of those old articles, they're all over the place on the internet. Get
If
the
you there's a
information on it,
place
write to the Smithsonian, say you are ordered by the Supreme Court to release this information to me, and you will get it.
Yeah. Aki, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I want to shout out to a friend of mine, Giants of North America. He's on Instagram. If you go on that site, he literally has thousands of newspaper clippings from the time that you mentioned that mention the Giants. And that's a very important point that you raised, Aki, because mainstream archaeologists will go, oh, where's the proof that this ever happened, this ever existed? But in a lot of these newspaper clippings, there are photographs and there are images,
Mm-hmm.
sketches, but actual photographs that people took next to these giants. So very, very well documented. This wasn't just some type of hoax or fad, but this was stuff that these were findings that happened all over the United States.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not just the United States. You have them in South America. In fact,
Mhm.
on my old property back in Norway, the one I let go when I came to the United States, there is a grave mound, a Viking grave mound, and it is kind of really big. Nobody ever dug into it,
Mhm.
but I bet there is someone big in that grave mound
Yeah, yeah,
because they're all over Norway, Sweden, and Northern Europe.
Yeah. Well, you guys have had
Remember
a
that?
whole history of giants within your, your traditions and stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this it gets interesting once you start putting your toe outside of the box and see what's there, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Oh gosh. What do you think? Could it be that the giants are of an alien origin way back in history?
That's yeah, that's a great question. I've always considered the Giants just to be kind of larger than average, I mean larger than normal humans. So the term Nephilim, I've always just taken as there were it's a Hebrew term, Hebrew participle, masculine plural participle, the fallen ones, and referring to like a fallen civilization. But and I think Eric von Daniken and Zachariah Stitchin give their own good arguments for this. The term Nephilim, fallen ones, could also refer to a spaceship or a sky people that have fallen from the skies, from outer space, and crash landed here. And I think if you look at the Anunnaki, there's definitely, at least they understood themselves as having extraterrestrial origin. And in the Native American traditions, to go back to them from when we started, they talk about the star people or the sky people, and it's the exact same kind of tradition for these star people as you have with the Anunnaki that Stitchin talks about in the Sumerian text.
Hmm. And there is a lot of armed, people sitting around would like to do a little more research on the internet about giants. Where do you think they should start to
Yeah,
find good information?
I think for me, Richard Dewhurst's book about giants was my starting point because I didn't know a lot of this information. So I would say Richard Dewhurst's book, if you look it up online, you'll find it. Also, one of my friends, Wayne May, he does a magazine called Ancient American Magazine, which I contribute to every now and then. And he talks a lot about this giant civilization. So those are two starting places that I think would be very good for people. Frank Joseph, in general, talks about ancient American civilization, and he's written a little bit on giants. Even David Childress from Ancient Aliens, he's written on giants. He has some articles that he's published along with Frank Joseph. So those are some really good starting points. And like I said, a lot of people have in recent years start talking about this phenomenon. So Giants of North America on Instagram. Another one of my friends, Chasing Mound Builders on Instagram. He has some great information, some great reference material with this stuff. So this information, even though, as we've talked about, there's kind of been a history of suppression, this information is out there and people can find it if they're willing to find it and look for it.
Yeah. We've been talking about the mound people and the ancient giants, but they're also here today. For those of you that are sitting in the armchair over there, want to do a little research, Google the Kandahar
Mm-hmm.
giant.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
military caught one about, oh, I don't know, close to 10 years ago now, but they ended up killing him. He came out of a
It,
cave over in, yeah, you know where. And he was 12, I think about 12 foot tall.
yeah. And it didn't go so well. It wasn't a happy giant
Yeah,
story. So yeah,
that's
yeah. So
amazing.
he was killed, but he took some soldiers down with him. Yes, yes.
Yeah, the
Um,
military people come out and say, yes, we did it. I have seen it. I
yeah.
was there.
And in Afghanistan, there was a military guy who was talking about this. He said he served in the military. He wasn't a soldier. So basically he had a lot of free time on his hands. So he would go into town and, go to the bars and stuff like that. And every Afghan person he talked to said, stay away from the cliffs, stay away from the mountains. Don't send your helicopters there. Don't go up there. We don't go up there. We never go up there. And the reason they said that is because you still have these giants up there, and apparently they're very primitive. I think they kind of digress, kind of de-evolved, if you want to use that term, but not very nice either.
Yeah, they are a little violent.
Yes, Yes.
And maybe that they're violent because they want to protect themselves. And
Yeah.
that could turn into violence very easily. Chances
Hmm.
are that they're very intelligent, but their scope of intelligence because of neural network has been limited to their little world.
Yeah. 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 But fascinating story. Yeah. And a
Oh
lot of
man.
confirmation of it. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and yeah, tell us also. Now you got some really interesting stuff in the from Egypt to Ohio. Tell us, how can we find your books?
Yes, so all my books are on Amazon. I have a author's page on Amazon. If you type in Adam Stokes, it will pop right up. So all of my books, I have books and articles on Amazon. I also have a Facebook page, and I have an Instagram page myself, Adam the Giant Guy, 2019. And so all of my links to my writings, links to my material can be found there. And I'm in the process of having an official website, Augie, Adam the Giant Guy, but I'm still working on it. Uh,
Okay.
a few tweaks here and there, but it should be up sometime this year.
Yeah, how tall are you?
I'm not tall at all. I'm only 5'3", 5'2",
Oh, really?
for
Okay.
sure.
Well,
Yes.
then you're not a giant.
No, no, sadly. I don't have the lineage, but I talk
Uh,
about it. So
there
yes.
you go. There
Yeah.
you go. There you go. Well, I'm sure glad that you could come on here and talk with me for a little bit because this was interesting.
This is
And
great, Aki. It's always great talking to you.
yeah, so let's do this again sometime in the near future. We can
Absolutely.
expand a little more.
Yes, yes, anytime, anytime.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being with us. And then to the listeners out there, go ahead and go to Amazon and put Adam Stokes in there. And his name will bring up the books, and you can look at it, and you can look at what in the text there, what he writes about. And chances are that you're going to want to read some of that. So then we will see you later. And until then, be good to each other. Thank you.